It took me many, many years, and I'm talking, I still have to remind myself today, not related to that, to always give yourself grace. You know, we're called to give people grace and to show mercy to folks, but as a football player, when you've been, trained to compete all your life, track and field and athletics, I had to learn many years later that, man, I need to be able to give myself grace.
Welcome back to the Fish Tank, presented by Van Horn Law Group and Casabella Design Group. Seth Levit, and the only podcaster to lead the NFL in receptions and bowl a perfect game. He is OJ McDuffie. Juice, how's that bowling game? I haven't asked you that question.
Well, you know what, man? The bowling game it's on average right about now, man. I'm somewhere around, 190, 195. I need to be over 200, though. I need to be over 200.
I was going to say, who's average? Not my average, because I'm way below that. That's for sure.
Yeah, man, going well, though. I mean, I only go out there once a month nowadays. I need to get more work in. That's the problem.
Yeah, well, it's all about the reps and the 10,000 hours for sure. Hey, listen, speaking of reps, another podcast, another offensive ball player.
Right.
We're on an epic run of offensive ball players here, as we are so excited.
Nobody cares about defensive players, man.
I care about defense.
Nah, man. We don't care about no damn defense, man.
Yeah, spoken like a wide receiver.
Most offensive guys can play defense too. Most defensive guys can't play offense too.
I can't dispute it. I can't, and I have no evidence to support it.
I said most, not all, just most.
Okay, fair enough. Well, this offensive player is not a wide receiver, because we were on a crazy run of wide receivers, but he was a dude who could run, that is for sure. Sammie Smith, diving into the Fish Tank. We've been texting back and forth and messaging through social media. Sammie gave us his word that this was going to happen, and here we are. Welcome to the Fish Tank, Sammie.
Hey, thank you, OJ. Thank you, Seth. Man, the texting back and forth, this is something I've wanted to do for a while, and, to have the opportunity to come on and spend a few moments with you all is certainly an honor. I'm excited about being able to be on here and share some of my journey with you all.
Well, and it was quite a journey. It was definitely quite a journey, and we're going to discuss all of that. And so, and actually, that's one of the things when you start doing the research, and especially someone who's had a story that has so many different chapters in it like yours, it's like, where do you start? But it seems to us that it makes the most sense to start this thing where your Miami Dolphins career began. So we're going to go back to 1989, and obviously going to talk about you, but I think it's also important that people, especially our younger listeners, understand where the Dolphins found themselves at this time as well, right? So the Dolphins had this amazing run in the early 80s. They went to 2 trips to the Super Bowl. They revolutionized offensive football with Dan and Dupe and Clayton, the Marx brothers, all of those things. But then, in 1984, right, nobody had thrown 40 touchdowns. Danny throws 48. But then they go on this run of 8-8, 8-7, and 6-10. They bottom out at 6-10 in 1988. The Killer Bees were faded away at that point. And while Danny might still be playing at an all-pro level, the run game, Juice, non-existent.
Right.
Again, when I say non-existent, they literally in 1988, the year before Sammie Smith is drafted, they have the fewest amount of rushing yards in the entire NFL. So the Dolphins need a savior at running back as April rolls around. I mean, that's what's happening here. And there's 3 backs entering into that draft that are considered top 10 guys. You've got the Heisman Trophy winner, and as we all know now, a Hall of Famer in Barry Sanders. You had a guy by the name of Tim Worley out of Georgia. And then we got this 6'2", 226-pound stud who was also a track star, who had broken Florida State's single-season rushing record, and Sammie Smith. Sammie, tell us about heading into that draft after that career, that really incredible career that you had at Florida State. Like, what were your expectations heading into that draft? Which, Juice, real quick, 1989, 4 out of the first 5 picks go on to the Hall of Fame. You got Troy Aikman, Barry Sanders, Derek Thomas, Deion Sanders, who we'll talk about because he and Sammie were very close. They were teammates. And later in that draft, Steve Atwater. So the 1989 draft was an epic one. But Sammie, tell us about what your expectations were and what it meant for an Apopka kid who grew up rooting for the Miami Dolphins to get that call at number 9.
Well, my expectations were to go high. I had a lot of interest from several of the teams that were in the top 10 to 12 teams picking. And, when I got the call from Coach Shula and the staff there, man, I was ecstatic. I was excited about coming to Miami and being a part of revitalizing the run game there. I thought that, we got off to a decent start. And then my second year there, we actually made the playoffs. And so I was real excited about the prospect of the team working on the running game, drafting Keith Sims and Richmond Webb, and going into my third season there, man, I was excited about having a breakout year and a big year. Unfortunately, I actually missed most of the preseason. I think the first game of the preseason was Tampa, and I had a knee injury. And then I came back, that first game, not ready really to play professional football, but I got thrown in the game, and things didn't turn out as I would have wanted them to turn out. But being drafted by Miami was a dream come true for me, playing for a legendary coach, playing with the best quarterback in the league, and then, sharing the stage really with Louis Oliver, who's a dear friend of mine, both of us being first-round draft picks. And we still communicate somewhat today, as I do with a lot of the players that I played with there.
Yeah, we're going to talk about Lou. The fact that the Dolphins did have a second first-round pick that year, thanks to a trade with Chicago. We got Lou at 25. When you look at Lou, he's one of my favorite teammates ever. I mean, I got a chance to play with Lou. I'm glad he was on my team, Sammie. Put it that way. You know what I mean? Him and Jarvis
thumper,
Williams. Both of those safeties, boy, they brought the hat, right?
Absolutely.
But like you said, man, from what we understand, you and Lou were friends, and had competed against each other, over the years. Of course, the Florida State-Florida rivalry that, Big Seth knows a lot about. How cool was it for you to show up to camp with a co-first rounder brother in your draft class? And, honestly, who really was like another brother to you, given that history you guys had together?
Man, I love Louis Oliver. I love Jarvis. He's going on to grace now, going on to glory. But those were two guys that, again, I competed against in college. Had a lot of respect for both of them. Again, like you said, OJ, I was glad they was on my side, because we had a lot of collisions in college that both of us probably walked off the field wobbly. Yeah. And so, I was just excited to see that all come together. And then, you had Lorenzo Hampton that was there at the time, that was a Florida kid, and, some others that were on the team that came from Florida teams. But Louis and Jarvis were two of my dear friends, and, man, I was excited to actually be on the same team with them and not having to compete against them anymore.
Sure.
Yeah. It's crazy to think about now, because sometimes that's the criticism is, they don't get enough players from the state here, and we've got obviously all this talent here locally. Juice likes to talk about the talent in Ohio, and I understand and respect that, but it's different. The water's different here in Florida.
Hey, I've learned, and I realize that Florida has the best football players. You know what I mean? But we're sitting at that second level with Texas and California and us. You know what I mean? So Pennsylvania's got a few guys too, but you can't just discount Ohio like that all the time, Big Seth.
Well, we got to keep some of these. We got to keep some of these Florida players in state going to our Florida colleges.
Right.
Yeah,
well, that's
that's another story.
Absolutely the case.
Yeah.
And
the money's all over the country now. Sammie.
It's a whole
There's money all over the country
game.
now.
Absolutely.
They can find them and pay them. Yeah.
It is a whole different ball game. So, I was just talking about the hope that was invested in you being selected as the 9th overall pick. But once you get through that excitement and joy of the draft, like, what happens next? Are the expectations made clear to you? Like, I would wonder, what does Don Shula say to his prize draft choice under those circumstances? Or how does a veteran player like a Dan Marino, a Mark Clayton, a Mark Duper, I just wonder how they approach this young guy who now enters the offensive meeting room, or even other backs, because there were other backs on the roster who were probably taking some heat for, things not being the running game that people would have hoped that it would have been. And then as you're kind of painting the picture of what you walked into, I also can't leave. There's another name, Juice. I can't leave this character out. Your offensive coordinator, Mr. Gary Stevens, was quite a character as well. So just talk about the environment that you walked into and how you feel your rookie season went, because it certainly had its share of promise. You had over 650 yards rushing. You had 6 touchdowns. But then there were some challenges, as you had indicated, with being banged up a little bit. There were some ball security things. So I'm just wondering how you would kind of say, all right, let me look at this rookie year and what that experience was like.
Well, I mean, all the guys accepted me in the meeting room, whether it's the running back or the offensive meeting room, with open arms. They were all helpful. Troy Stratford, Lorenzo Hampton, they were guys that would help in the meetings. They wanted you to perform well. They wanted you to practice well. They wanted to make sure you were prepared when you got in the game to play. And then Danny and the rest of the offense was the same. Man, I love Mark Clayton and Duper. And so it was with open arms. The coaches, Tony Nathan was one of my favorites. Miss Coach Tassif, that was my running
Carl,
back
yeah,
coach,
yeah,
Coach
Carl.
Shula. They were all supportive now, but I came in with my own expectations. I really wanted to come in and light it up. But, as a rookie, you got to learn the game, man. You got to learn a whole new offensive scheme. You got to learn your players. And so I felt like my rookie year could have been a lot better. I wanted to get to camp as soon as I could. There was a little holdout stuff going on that was happened when you were negotiating. And I kept trying to press my agent, hey, I'm ready to get to camp. And then I get there and I think maybe I'm there for a week, and we got a game. Can't remember if it was a preseason game or if it was a regular season, but I remember we played up in Foxborough. And my first carry or two, I ripped off a couple of nice runs and then I twist my ankle. And again, I think that comes from just not being there getting the reps, being in the environment of training. And so I go into the first few weeks of the season kind of banged up with a bad ankle. And so, again, I was excited about the opportunity to play, opportunity to learn from the guys that were there. And I didn't like the way our record was at the end of that season. Yeah. But, again, was excited about coming back the next year and hopefully making the playoffs and, being able to see some kind of uptick in the running game, which, I thought that we did overall.
And that's what I was going to ask, Sammie. Like, was it ever vocalized like, hey, our running game has not been what it is and we need you to come in here and bring this to do X, Y, and Z for Dan or the offense? Or was it just kind of understood and you had your own standards, as you had indicated? I'm just curious if it was ever really like on the nose brought up to you and vocalized, or if it was just something that was understood.
I mean, it was understood. It wasn't like vocalized at a point like, hey, you're the savior here. Again, I had the opportunity to come in and learn. And, that's one of the things that I can say with the guys that were there and the coaches is that there wasn't like a pressure from them. I had pressure within myself. I had pressure within myself because, I wanted to be great. And I wanted to help that team become a playoff team again and a team that would compete and beat Buffalo. And I think that second year, if I remember correct, man, we had Buffalo come there on a hot, nasty, muggy day in Miami, and we beat them pretty convincingly. I think it might have been 30-7 or something. It was a lopsided.
The fans are still crying about hot, muggy days, Sammie. They still cry about it.
And it was a lopsided score. And so, that second year, I felt like our team was headed in the right direction. It felt like we were a team on the verge of having a breakout, to becoming a team that would challenge every year. And then that third year happens, and, it goes downhill from there.
Sammie, managing football, I mean, is one thing, and I can certainly relate to the adjustment of leaving a big program where you're a team leader, a key contributor, and for that dream to come true, of being a first-round draft choice, that's big time, man. Because I know that Seth, I finally get a chance to talk with Seth because Seth gives me a hard time, Sammie, all the time about being a first-round draft pick. Now I got somebody that's picked 16 picks ahead of me in the first round.
He loves when the guy's been drafted ahead of him because I give him such a hard time.
This is big time for me. This is
rolling the red carpet out for Juice.
But, and then you're out there with a bunch of grown men, honestly, that are out there, trying to feed their families. But as soon as the season ends, football became really insignificant when you face something that honestly no parent should ever have to experience. And from what we read, you had just returned home from being out of town, discovered that you tragically lost your 2-month-old son to Sid, Sammie. And as a father of 2 boys myself, man, I can't even imagine how devastating that was. And then I think about your testimony that you share with a lot of young people nowadays, man. Would you personally say that this was the moment that you could, point to where things in your life kind of started spiraling?
Yeah, I would say it's probably one of them. It definitely was a traumatic thing to go through for me and my wife at the time, but I do know that OJ, God had his hands in all of that. I had left, I believe this was on a Friday, and I'm thinking this was on a Friday, and I drove from Miami down to Orlando to Apopka area, and I was out with some friends that night. And for some reason, I was compelled to tell them, hey, man, I'm leaving. I'm getting ready to drive back down to Miami. And they couldn't understand, well, man, you just drove all the way down here. Why are you getting ready to head back? I said, I just feel like I need to be home. I ain't really feeling this club scene. And so I get in my car I get on the road and I'm headed back down the turnpike. I'm going home. I don't even call my wife and tell her, hey, I'm coming home. I just wanted to get home. And I walked into my place must have been about 3 in the morning or so, 2:30. And the first place I went to was our baby's crib. And when I reached in to touch my son, he was cold and there was a wheeze that came out, just like a wheeze, and he was gone, and so my wife woke up, we were hysterical, and of course we called 911, and he had passed. And I believe that was God kind of watching out for me, that I would be there with my wife, that I wouldn't wake up the next morning and in my home in Apopka, have to deal with her finding our baby alone. And I've been out partying all night. So I think God kind of looked out for me in that moment. And I say that to say I'm thankful that I was there and that I was able to experience that with her and not had the guilt that I would have felt had I woke up somewhere else. And just thinking about that incident, it was a tough thing to go through. And it took a long time for me to kind of wrap my head around why God did that. I never really knew. And it would have been 2013, the 2014, I think, Orange Bowl, or 13 Orange Bowl. Florida State played down there. And I was the guest speaker at the FCA breakfast that they have down there for that bowl game. And there must have been 1,000 people at that event. And I got a chance to kind of share my story. I talked some about that. Talked some about my time in Miami. And when I was done, man, there was a line of people waiting to come and talk to me. And I kept seeing this one couple. They kept getting to the end of the line.
Wow.
They wanted to be last to talk to me. And I had hundreds of people that were there in the stands that day that were apologizing for the Sammie Sucks chants, that they were there. And they didn't know that I had gone through, losing a baby and how tough it was down there. But this one couple came up to me at the end and they asked me with tears in their eyes, they said, Sammie, we just want to know, how did you and your wife get through losing your son at 2 months old? Because we just lost the baby to SIDS.
Man.
And it was at that moment, OJ, that God gave me the answer. I had been asking that question to God for many years, and he gave me the answer to give to them, but it was for me too. He told me, says, was my son not more important than your son? He gave his life willingly so that you could be in a right relationship and have an opportunity to have a right relationship with the Heavenly Father. And I shared that with those folks, and I told them, I said, you're going to have a testimony that'll be able to help people that may have go through the same thing you're going through, just like I am doing it with you all now. Thank you for asking me that question, because I got the answer that I've been looking for all these years, is what I told them.
Wow,
that's powerful.
And just to fast forward, I had been at Ole Miss working as their life coach for 7 seasons there. In 2016, I went there and I moved back here to Lake County in 2023. And I'm visiting a church. We're deciding whether we want to be a part of that congregation. And my wife and I start going through this connections class. And this gentleman, he told me, said he had been wanting to ask me for a few weeks. But he didn't know how to approach it. He thought I was the Sammie Smith that played down there. And so he came up to me one day before church, and he expressed to me that he wanted to bring it up, but he wasn't sure how I gotten over it. He was the paramedic that showed up that night when we called 911 for my son.
Wow.
My goodness.
And so
Wow.
with just basically with tears in both our eyes, I told him that I thanked him for his service and being there. And he shared that with me, that, man, I'm a huge Dolphin fan, and I was on the scene, and I didn't realize until after we had left that was you. He says, when we left and I'm riding and we're riding away, I tell the guy that's with me, man, that was Sammie Smith that plays for the Dolphins. We just, came to his house in this tragic moment. So to meet this man, some 30 plus years later at a church service, I think is pretty,
absolutely. Wow.
Remarkable is the right word.
Yeah,
wow.
buddy, man.
Wow.
And Lake County.
In Lake County, yeah, not down here, but in Lake
of all
County.
places.
Yeah.
He recently moved down here, him and his wife.
That's incredible.
That is absolutely incredible.
When we hear stories that, as Juice said, football becomes insignificant, you hear a story like that. And we just had this with another guest as well. It's like, okay, now I'm sitting here looking at our questions and going to pivot back to football, which seems so silly. But the reality is that's what people don't understand is you guys are these superheroes from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock on Sundays, but then you take your helmet off and you're real people. So you are doing that dance. And so like, it feels awkward for me to ask the next question, but that's the dance that you guys did every day was have to kind of balance this being all in this elite football world and then go deal with real life. And maybe that's how I kind of process going through these questions, but thank you for sharing that.
What if going bankrupt was the best thing that happened to you? Whether it's your wages being garnished, car repossessed, house foreclosed, or you're suffocating with debt, a good bankruptcy attorney can give you peace of mind that you need and deserve. My name is Chad Van Horn from Van Horn Law Group, and I've personally seen people thrive after filing for bankruptcy. The shame of bankruptcy is just a ploy to keep you in debt forever. There is no shame to work with Van Horn Law Group to get rid of your debt for good. If you're ready to get your life back, call us today. Se habla español.
And that was right after your rookie season. And so then, and you indicated this a little bit earlier, in your second season, it did look like things were all starting to head in the right direction. You played in all 16 games. You rushed for more than 800 yards. You had 8 touchdowns. The playoffs roll around, Juice and Sammie. Juice and I were just talking about the current Dolphins last night. And it's like, you need your best players to be their best in the biggest moments. And so when the playoffs rolled around, you ran for almost 200 yards in 2 games. You averaged nearly 4.5 yards per carry. The Dolphins, beat the Chiefs, and you were a big part of that. And then, weren't able to win that next game. But, you certainly brought your A game. And we were like, look, this is why Sammie Smith is here. Like, this is the compliment to Marino's greatness that we needed. What started to click in that second year that we were able to see signs of what all of us, including yourself, I think, had expected?
Well, I think Keith Sims and Richmond Webb.
The big fellas, yeah. I love that.
Keith Sims and Richmond Webb, and then one of my favorite teammates of all, Tony Page, was incredible. And then, just the play action, man, the play action that we were able to generate, where they kind of started respecting the run some, and seeing Dan be able to make big plays to Clayton and Duper and Farrell Edmonds, Crash Jensen, all those guys. I think we all just started to come together as a team. And again, I felt like that season, we were on to something that we could build on during the off season. And I think, man, that off season, I probably worked harder that off season than I had at any point in my career, because I was excited about coming back and being able to be the player that I knew I could be, and the player that the Dolphin fans wanted and my teammates needed. And again, just, unfortunately there, I wasn't able to make it through just the preseason to get ready. When you get hurt in the first game and it's a knee injury, and then you're on the shelf for the next 3-4 weeks trying to get a knee right, and to come back and play and start the season off the way it did, it was pretty traumatic, man. It wasn't fun for me. And but as I look back, and as I've had the time to look back over the years, I really kind of assessed that Kansas City game to the game that really turned my career around for a negative, that really shortened my career.
Yeah, I was going to talk about that, Big Seth, that Kansas City game. Like you talked about a little bit, Sammie, about 91. You start the season on IR, which, always makes things tough, no matter what, man. And, then in October, there is that 2-game stretch you're talking about, Kansas City and then home against in Houston, where I have to imagine, as you're talking about right now, your entire world changed. And at least your football world was pretty much turned upside down. Let's start with that Kansas City game. The Chiefs, they're riding, we talked a little bit earlier before we got on, they're riding Christian Okoye for 5 straight plays to score on the first drive. And then you guys march down to, the field to answer. But with first and goal at the 2, you're stripped of the football, and Kansas City returns at 100 yards per touchdown. Next thing you know, it's 14-0 Kansas City. Not much change after that, 42-7. But did I hear this correctly? By the time you got to the sidelines, you don't even remember the play.
I did.
Yeah.
I did. And the funny thing about that game was I got instructions from Coach Tassif and Coach Shula going into that game, in the locker room. Hey, we're going to use you sparingly today. We know you're not in shape. You've only had a few days of practice. If you're out there and you get tired, just look to the sideline and motion and start coming off, and we'll get Mark Higgs in. And I wasn't even sure that it was the first series. OJ. I thought it was later on in that first round. Maybe it was the first series. I'm not sure, but I can remember going in and having 2 or 3 carries back to back, and they were, 8, 9, 10-yard runs. And now I'm tired, and I start walking off and signaling for Mark Higgs to come in, and Coach Shula waves on stage.
Oh, man.
I do remember that.
What happened?
I remember that. I remember because we talked about it. The game plan changed. It went from, we're going to just play you sparingly. If you get tired, come on out.
Right.
No, I got this guy, and he's running the ball pretty good there. I'm going to make this big joker play his way into shape. Right. But I remember, going back into the game, I vividly remember Dan asking me, Sammie, are you all right? Because I'm in the huddle, leaning, puffing, tired. And I said, man, I'm tired. He says, well, get out of here and get Higgs in. I said, well, Coach Shula told me to stay in. I tried to do that. And so we run another play. I can't remember what it was. I thought it was a pass to Jensen that picked up, a nice little 10, 15, 20 yards or whatever it was. But on the goal line, I don't remember it. I remember, I know I had to know the play that was called because I went to get the ball, didn't secure it well. And it was, on the tackle was from watching the film and listening to Tony Page that was returned for a touchdown. But in that moment, I didn't remember. I just remember walking to the sideline and asking Tony what happened and him telling me that, man, you fumbled the ball. They picked it up and ran it, for a touchdown. And then he calls the trainer and they come with the, break the smelling salt and they do the little
Yeah,
test.
that'll solve it.
Yeah, he tells me this. Tony tells me, you got to talk to Tony. He tells me all of this.
Wow.
And then I'm back in the game later on. I'm still kind of playing. And there was a few times where we apparently broke the huddle and I didn't know what the play was or what the count was. And I would walk up to Tony as a fullback, hey, what's the play and what's the count? And so we would get back to Miami after that game, and I had some testing the next day because I had headaches, and it was found that I had a concussion. It's in my medical records. But then how do I play that next week?
Well, there was no protocol, right? I mean,
Right.
there was no – they didn't have the concussion protocol.
No,
I don't think – not in 91.
We didn't. And so I think that those 2 games, like I said, man, they just derailed my career, especially the one in Miami. That game there, just my confidence level was shot. And it took me many, many years. And I'm talking, I still have to remind myself today, not related to that, to always give yourself grace. We're called to give people grace and to show mercy to folks. But as a football player, when you've been, trained to compete all your life, track and field and athletics, I had to learn many years later that, man, I need to be able to give myself grace. I need to be able to forgive myself for, mistakes that I made or wrong things. And I would go through stuff, with the prison situation. I had to find out how to give myself grace, because if I can't give myself grace, then how am I going to extend it to someone else?
Yeah.
How am I going to allow God to use anything that's happened in my life for the betterment of other people if I can't give myself grace?
Yeah, golly. And when you think about that next game, without knowing what happens before that, all I've got is a bunch of rabid fans, and we've probably all been them, and for whatever teams we cheer for. For me, it was, your Miami Dolphins. But, you're sitting there in the stadium all of a sudden. And by the way, Juice, you had Warren Moon versus Dan Marino in that game, and they each threw 3 interceptions in the first half.
Right.
Like, it was an ugly game, but it came down to the wire, and then here we are, 1st and goal on the 1 again, and that happens. And it really was, you look back at it now, and especially hearing your entire story, it was one of the darker moments in the history of this franchise in terms of the way the fans responded. And you were interviewed in the locker room afterwards, and this is the quote that I found in one of these papers here. You said, there will be a day when the fans cheer me again. And when they do, it will never occur to them what they said Sunday and how much it hurt me, my family, and my friends. They don't care. They only care about wins and losses. And maybe you said this the following week in the locker room reading that. And that's pretty profound in that moment. And that's without you even knowing how long you would carry that game and that moment and the Sammie Sucks chants and all of those things without really having any idea what would happen afterwards. So And I guess he just kind of answered it. But when was that moment where you started to kind of give yourself grace? Or what was there ever a point where you were able to not just be in the funk, but identify that the funk could be traced back to that moment?
Well, I think, Seth, that moment changed so much in my life.
Yeah.
You know, it took away my confidence in myself as a player. I'd always been a confident player. I had never had an issue where I was shaking. Did we lose games in high school and in college? Of course. Did I have big games in college and some games that maybe weren't as big as I'd like them to be? Of course. But I had never experienced anything like that. And so to play the game of football, man, you got to have confidence. You got to be at an all-time high to go out there and compete in your confidence level. And I lost that day. And not only that, I think I lost some other things that were important to me, like my character traits, how I had been raised, the people that had poured into me, my coaches from college, Coach Bowden, my high school coach, my mom and my dad, you know, all the things that they had poured into me over the years. I kind of lost that then. And so when you fast forward and you look at my time going to Denver, I went there to train, excited about getting ready to play, and I tore my groin muscle there, which sidelined me getting ready for that season. And then when it was all over and said and done, you know, you've been a part of a community and you've been a part of a team all your life, and then you're out and football's taken away, and now I'm trying to do positive stuff in my community. I founded a company, and I was building homes for low-income people that couldn't afford. I was holding mortgages for them, trying to help them get homes, and then I stepped into something that was really something that turned my life upside down, you know, with some friends that were involved in illegal drugs, illegal drug trade. And it started out with me lending money. And basically that was the most of it, you know, me lending money and getting involved in something that would turn my life upside down. But I think when you ask that question, what was the catalyst, what kind of started the healing? It's sad to say it was getting arrested and going to prison.
Yeah.
Because at that point, you know, I had an opportunity to slow down, really do an overlook of my life and what had transpired in the previous 5 to 6 years or however long it was. And I had an opportunity to really assess, what do I want to do with my life? You know, what purpose does God have for me? And then at that point, once I started to figure that out, football was irrelevant. I knew that I had more purpose. And, you know, one of the things that, you know, really kind of hit the nail for me. It was 1998. I was in Edgefield, South Carolina at a Edgefield Correctional Facility there. And I'm walking around the track and I hear Sammie Smith report to the warden's office. And I'm like, geez, what do they want with me at the warden's office, right?
Yeah.
And so I started heading there. And the first thing I'm thinking is they've done like a shakedown in the rooms and somebody's planted something in my space. I'm getting ready to get locked up in the segregation. And so as I walked into the building, I hear these voices. I hear the warden on the speakerphone, and he's in his office, and I hear 2 other voices talking and laughing with him. And I know these voices. Well, it's Coach Bowden and Jim Gladden.
Wow.
Jim Gladden recruited me to Florida State, and they wanted to know if I would be willing to record a video for that 98 football team that was under the, you know, the Free Shoes University stuff that was going on, you know, with Peter Warwick and them, and I guess the shoe scandal or merchandise scandal there in Tallahassee. And so
Foot Locker.
Yeah, so I agreed to do that. But I say that to say that, man, I walked out of that office feeling uplifted. I was walking in there kind of dejected, but I walked out of there feeling, man, I could be used. You know, that God can still use me. That Coach Bowden and them want me to share in the situation I'm in. They want me to share some encouragement to that football team. And so I knew right then and there that God had something for me to do, and I wanted to embrace whatever it is that he had for me. And if that meant sharing my journey, sharing the ups and downs, then I was going to do it the best that I could.
Good,
man.
Yeah, it's good.
It's every response, we're talking about how powerful it is.
Yeah, and I'm going to tell you what, man. I'm a huge fan of Bobby Bowden. I know he and Joe Paterno were really good friends, and I think they both had the same thing. They loved their kids, you know, and it was beyond football. Sam, you had run the rock for them, and for how long at that point? You know what I mean? And they still cared.
Yes, I always leaned on Coach Bowden for advice. Even when in 2016, when I was contemplating leaving this area, because I was working for the Fellowship of Christian Athletes here, and I had a facility that I was using to train kids, for speed and agility and weightlifting. And it was another source of ministry for me to be able to do ministry through that facility. And I had the opportunity to go out to Ole Miss to serve as their character coach and their chaplain for the football team and the coaches ministry. And I really didn't want to leave. I was happy doing what I was doing. And then I reached out to Coach Bowden and just kind of, wanted his advice. And he told me, say, Sammie, if God's opened the door for you, pray about it. And if it's open for you, walk through it. If he's calling you there. And he said something to me that sticks with me today. He said that God's not concerned with your ability to do that job. He's concerned with your availability. So if you'll make yourself available and you'll allow him to use you, you can be impactful for those players and the coaches at Ole Miss. Well, I went there the first season I was there, Coach Hugh Freeze recruited me to come there. And then he's gone. You all know the little scandal thing that happened with him. So I'm there with him 1 year. He brought me there, and now he's gone. And I think that was for the reason I was there, to help that team navigate through losing a coach.
Yeah.
In transition. I'll never forget, Matt Luke took over for Coach Freeze, and we had that staff meeting the next morning. And he looks at me and says, Sammie, you got anything for us? Now, we just lost our leader. We just lost our head coach the day before. And Luke has to step in and take his role. And he says, you got anything for us? And I said, yeah, I do. I said, it's not just for you all. It's for all of us, for me too. I said, make sure you practicing what you preach. I said, it was Coach Freeze yesterday. But, man, if we're not living to the standard like we say we are and the things that we value and it's not coming out in our private life, then that could be one of us. That could be you, Coach Luke. The next time, that could be me. And so that was my message to them at that moment was, man, just make sure that how you portray yourself and who you are, that you are actually practicing to be that person that you say you are.
Makes all the sense in the world.
Hell yeah.
And Sammie, it's really cool to hear that moment where you kind of rediscovered purpose when they visited you to get that message. And I'm sure you have shared your story. Well, you told us hundreds of individuals at a bowl game, how many hundreds of players, but then you decided to document it and you wrote a book. My Name Is Not 18121-018, a transformative story of hope discovered in the shadows of life's lowest moments. It's literally what we just detailed here. What inspired you to document it, to not just show up and be a guest speaker or to walk into a locker room? What inspired you to document it so that you have this now written testimony? And maybe I'm answering the question here with the question, but this written testimony that now can be shared beyond your availability.
Well, that book, actually, there's so much more that is not in that book that I could have put. I started writing probably about 17 years ago. Wow. And I think I had about 5 chapters, and then I hit a little roadblock. And I knew at that time it just wasn't time for me to do it. And so when I got to Ole Miss and started serving that team, some other things started happening in my life. Some, just seeing God move in a lot of different ways, having the opportunity to work with Coach Freeze for that year, having A.J. Brown and D.K. Metcalf and these kids coming and being a part of the FCA and the things that we were doing there. I just felt like there was some story that I wanted to get out and that I wanted to share. And the book really is basically an encouraging book. Each chapter I'm talking about something that happened in my life. And at the end of it, I'm posing questions to the reader to challenge them to think about how would they handle these certain situations. And, I was just excited about putting pen to paper and being able to share some stories that hopefully would be impactful. I have the one in there about my son, losing my son. I have one in there about Deion. Mm-hmm. And that chapter's entitled Humility. And the average fan,
that's funny,
wouldn't attribute humility to Deion.
No, sir.
I talk about something back in college, and I had tried to get Deion to come out for track and field from the time I was there because I knew he could fly. He didn't have a track background, but I did. And so I ran track all through college. And for my first couple of years there, I was our conference champion in 100 and 200 meters. And then, I got Deion to come out our last year. And Deion had never, done handoffs, been a part of relays. He hadn't done that. And the coaches went to Deion, and he didn't know I knew this. The coaches went to Deion and told him that we're going to put you at the anchor leg, and we'll put Sammie at third leg. That way you only have to receive the handoff. You don't have to give it. You just got to learn one thing. And Deion tells them, no, I'm going to just have to learn how to receive it and hand it, because that's Sammie's role. He's been the anchor of this relay ever since he's been here, and he's going to stay in that role. And if you know track and field, in a 4x1 relay, the anchor leg, that's the showboat leg,
that's
right?
The guy.
That's the highlight. That's the one that gets to cross the tape first. And so, for Deion to show, in my opinion, great humility and say, no, I'm going to work to get to where I need to be to make this relay team successful. And I'm going to do it at the third leg, not the anchor, I thought showed a great deal of humility. And so just a lot of little stories in the book like that. And I'm actually working on another one. I don't know when I'm going to have it out, but there were so many people that would send me messages. Man, I wanted more. I wanted to know more. And there is so much more that I could have talked about in that book.
Well, the next chapter's got to be written at some point then, Sammie. We're looking forward to it too, bro.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So, Sammie, we wrap up every episode with two fun segments. The first one of which is we call Fish Tank Numerology. So at both Florida State and with the Miami Dolphins, you wore jersey number 33. What was the story behind that number?
My favorite number was 34. I wore 34 in high school. I was a huge Herschel Walker fan.
Okay.
So I wanted number 34. And then when I got to Florida State, Ron Sellers' number there is retired. Number 34 is retired. And there was a push, and I think that Ron Sellers would have let me wear that jersey because I was like the highest recruited running back coming out of the country that year.
I was going to say, Juice, They don't just pull numbers out of retirement for...
Correct, unless you're special. Yeah, for sure. No.
And I believe that there had been some conversations, and I could have probably gotten that number, but that was his. That was his legacy. That number was retired, and Ron Sellers, as part of his legend at Florida State. And the next closest one that I wanted to make legendary was 33. And Tony Dorsett was one of my favorites, too.
Damn right. You damn right.
That's cool.
And so, so when I came to Miami, the number was available and I was able to get it.
Worked it. Yeah, well, the 9th overall pick, they're going to make sure that number, unless it's on the rafters too, it's going to be available. I love that stuff. So the second segment that Juice was alluding to is actually how we end every podcast. It is our fish tank 2-minute drill. So in your mind, we've got 2 minutes left on the clock. We're going to throw a few questions that maybe will be fast paced. We'll see. If you want to milk the clock, you can use a few timeouts. We'll leave that up to you. And then we're going to bring this thing home and let you get back into doing what Sammie Smith does on a daily basis. Cool?
Cool.
All right. Here we go. 2 minutes on the clock, Big Seth.
Yes, sir.
All right. Sammie, we established that you and Deion Sanders were both top 10 picks in the 89 draft, and most people now have figured out that you both were teammates at Florida State. And I know that you taught Prime how to maximize his speed. But my question to you is, who was faster?
Well, Deion was faster. And I think I get the notoriety of teaching Deion how to maximize speed. I don't know where that come from. Maybe I made a statement that got blown up. I'm not sure. Deion could flat out run. He was inflexible. He couldn't stretch.
Wow.
He didn't know how to come out of the blocks when he first got there. And we worked on that. But, man, once he learned how to get out of those blocks, I couldn't catch him in those 100 meters.
All right.
Yeah, that makes sense, too. You see him in the – everyone talks
everything's
about
like high
speed.
stepping, straight leg. Yeah, everything.
Right. Game speed versus that.
Deion came out and then had any track experience. And probably 4 or 5 track meets in, he runs sub 10.3 in the 100 meters.
That's insane.
And so he was just a phenomenal athlete. I wanted him on that relay with us.
I bet you did. Okay, we'll keep it moving here. 2-minute drill. You are the second Apopka High grad to be drafted by the Miami Dolphins. You were the fourth Apopka High grad to actually play for the Dolphins at some point in your career. Can you name any of the other 3 individuals?
From Apopka?
From Apopka High that also were Miami Dolphins.
Man, Jeez.
And they had a lot of errors.
I think Aaron Jones played down there.
Yes, he did. He got 1 year, 96.
And Aaron was drafted the year before me. We were teammates.
Yep.
I'm not sure if I don't think Sapp didn't play for Miami.
No.
What about Merriweather?
No. So, but a guy who played with Sapp was a receiver by the name of James McKnight.
Oh, James.
Yeah, J-Mac.
Absolutely. James did.
The J-Mac was one. And then
we had another one?
There was another one. So those two guys came in as free agents, but there was another guy who was drafted, and I saw a picture of you and him. He was a fullback from Auburn. Chandler Cox. No, it was Chandler Cox. It was a fullback.
That's what I was thinking, Chandler Cox.
Yep. So 4 popular guys, all were Dolphins.
Yeah. I got a chance to spend some time with Chandler, during Ole Miss Auburn games.
Right.
We time together.
I saw this great picture, and that's what kind of gave me the idea. I wouldn't have bet, and silly me, you were teammates. Aaron Jones would have been, I thought, the hardest one because he played the least amount of time for the Dolphins. Right. Good stuff. Clock is running, Juice.
Yes. All right, we established you played for Bobby Bowden, Don Shula, and Dan Reeves. If you had to pick one of these 3 legendary coaches, one to be a stand-up comedian, one to, to have your back in a bar brawl, and one to go fishing with, who gets what job?
Coach Bowden would be the comedian. I'd take Coach Shula in the bar brawl.
Oh, I believe it.
And I'd take Dan to go fishing.
Go fishing, all right.
So good. Okay, final question here. We're going to cross the darn goal line on this one, Sammie. I believe it. Prior to the 1988 season, FSU released the Seminole Rap. There was some controversy surrounding it just because the University of Miami had won their championship. They did not like it. That first game, you guys went 11-1, and that first game was one I'm sure you want to forget. But what I want to know is nearly 40 years later, do you remember your verse from the Seminole Rap?
My name is Sammie. I like to run. Just give me the ball and I'll get the job done. Because I'm 6'2", weigh 224. Just give me the ball. Watch me score. Run a 9-400. Turn on a dime. Get in my way. It's power time. But I'm not here to brag about this and that. I just want to do the Seminole Rap.
The 2-minute drill. How about that? Sammie Smith. That is a touchdown, baby.
Let's forget that rap, man. Let's forget that rap.
You haven't forgotten it, Sammie, so I certainly can't either. Man, oh, man, that was great. This was fun.
That's
too much fun.
Too good. Hey, Sammie, thanks for diving in, man.
Thank you, guys, man. I appreciate you. Like I said, I get a chance to catch y'all from time to time. It pops up on my timeline and my social media, and I love what you all are doing. Keep doing it. Stay blessed.
Dolphins, number one. Of course, y'all, this ain't no ordinary sports talk. Never been that fish tank. Go get your aqua orange. Yeah, it's time to never been that fish tank. It's only legendary talking.